Hello and welcome. Welcome to our hybrid, in-person and virtual Payne Lecture. We welcome to our virtual attendees that we can not see, but we can feel your good spirit with us. We are so thrilled to be here reaching out across the world to our friends, the Friends of the Gerontology Institute for this really exciting talk. I'm Jennifer Kraft Morgan. I'm the Interim Director and Associate Professor at the Gerontology Institute at Georgia State. I want to take just a minute to thank our long-term director, Dr. Elizabeth Burgess, sitting in the middle here in person, so it's nice to be able to see her. Dr. Burgess was our director for 12 years and did many, many Payne lectures, and she's very happy to not be in charge tonight and just enjoy the show. We also want to congratulate her on becoming the new Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs at the College of Arts and Sciences at GSU, so yay, Elizabeth. I'm going to keep my remarks really short because our virtual attention spans are less and less, and the fact that we can't feed you this year at our lovely reception. We're hoping to wrap up the talk within an hour and 15 minutes. We know we have a lot of competition for your attention, and we're really excited that you're here with us tonight. The Barbara Pittard Payne Lectureship in Gerontology was established in honor of Dr. Barbara Payne Stansel, the founding director of the Gerontology Institute. And you can read more about her in this in the program. So if you're here in the audience, you got a printed program. If you're virtual, Dr. Skipper sent you a QR code, and the QR code that was on the first slide you can use to pull up the virtual program. Excellent. So I'd like to take an opportunity to thank Reverend Stiles, pictured here, one back, yep, with Tiny Tim, her dog. Dr. Stiles, Reverend Stiles is Barbara's daughter, and she's been a real inspiration for us and really inspired us to do lots of great lectures with the Payne series. And I just want to thank her and her family for their continued support of the lecture and of the Gerontology Institute in general. Next slide, please. This lecture wouldn't happen without the coordinating committee for the Payne Lecture, Dr. Candace Kemp, our co-chair, Dr. Antina Skipper, or Skip, is our other co-chair, and Dr. Jessica Turner from Psychology was also on the committee. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and thank you to Denise Butler, our department specialist who helped us get it all together. Thanks so much. I want to also say thank you to our students, alumni, community partners, and all the Friends of Gerontology that make this community event possible. We really appreciate you, and we thank you, and we're sorry that we haven't been together as much as we would like to, and so we're really excited to be together tonight. Thank you for all you do for older adults and their care partners across Georgia and beyond. I think we even have participants from Spain tonight, so that's exciting. So this is my chance, next slide please, to do a little infomercial on the Gerontology Institute. The Gerontology Institute is small but mighty. I think the best thing about the Gerontology Institute is our family-like and collegial culture that extends from our faculty and staff. It includes our alumni and our students and our community partners and all of the Friends of Gerontology across the nation and across the world. This is our chance to remind you that we have a successful master's program in gerontology, a graduate certificate, an undergraduate bachelor's of interdisciplinary studies with a concentration in gerontology, and an undergraduate certificate. If you are someone, or if you know someone who's interested in our program, please get in touch with us. We are working on sending out more information on our various social media platforms like Facebook, where we did a live event tonight, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Please like us on all these outlets so we can get the ball rolling, and send us emails if you're interested in getting on our various lists. You can email us at gerontology@gsu.edu, and we'll send the email where it needs to go to get your questions answered. So tonight, we're going to allow the audience that's virtual to provide questions to Vonetta, Dr. Dotson, through our email. So if you want to email gerontology@gsu.edu during the live broadcast, then we can pull those questions out at the end. So please do that if you're interested. So without further ado, I get the pleasure of introducing our distinguished speaker and friend and affiliate faculty, Dr. Vonetta Dotson. Her full bio is in the program, so I won't take up her time talking through that, but I wanted just to say a little bit. Dr. Vonetta Dotson is a gero-neuropsychologist, author, speaker, and entrepreneur. She's an associate professor of psychology and gerontology at Georgia State University. She's the founder and president of CerebroFit Integrated Brain Health and a senior project scientist at NASA. She is also a fellow of the American Psychological Association Society for Clinical Neuropsychology. She is also the author of a brand new book published by the American Psychological Association entitled Keep Your Wits About You, The Science of Brain Maintenance as You Age. Without further ado, Dr. Dotson, please come up.
Thank you so much for the introduction and for the invitation to give this presentation. I was thinking about it as I put my slides together that I have very few opportunities to talk about my work to my colleagues and the students who I work with because I do so many talks in other places. So it's a nice chance to be able to talk to the friends that I have around me, as well as the virtual audience that includes people from, it sounds like, all over the globe. So thank you for this opportunity. I'm thrilled to share with you the things that make me excited when I come to work every day, which is thinking about how we can age better, how we can live in a way that gives us the best chances of having a healthy brain, which then leads to other positive outcomes. The one little caveat I'll give before I start is, number one, hold on tight, because there's a lot I'm going to cover. So I'm telling you right now, it's going to be an overview, because each of these different topics could be a lecture in and of itself. Because of that, I made a point to make this much more higher level in the sense of kind of general concepts. I'm not going to show you a lot of data, but everything I'm going to say is data-based. Everything is based on the literature, and I have the abbreviated references at the bottom of the slides, but I am more than happy to send a reference list, PDFs, whatever you would like after this is over, so you'll have my contact information. So that's my little caveat. Having said that, let's talk about how to live well so that we can age well. So I forgot that I'm the one who has the slide advancer, so let's move on. So first, let's talk about what is a healthy brain. When we refer to brain health, which is really what I focus my research on, we're talking about trying to preserve brain integrity and the functioning of the brain at whatever age that we are. That's really important to think about because it's saying we're not limiting it to having your brain be like a 20-year-old. It's that whatever age you are, you're having the healthiest brain possible. That requires having optimal brain integrity in terms of the structure of the brain. That means things such as the integrity of the neurons or the brain cells. It's the volume or size of the brain overall or particular regions of the brain. And it's also those connections between brain cells. So you'll hear me talk about brain structure throughout this, and that's what I'm talking about. We also talk about brain function. And so when we measure the brain using neuroimaging research, which my lab does, we were looking at things like blood flow in the brain, metabolism, and also that communication between neurons. So I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page about that. And so then what does it mean to have a healthy brain? Well, when you have a healthy brain, that leads to a number of positive benefits. You have better memory and cognitive skills at any age. This is from, basically infancy throughout our lives. Over time, when you have a healthier brain, you have a lower risk for dementia, including Alzheimer's disease, as well as other types. I'm not trying to say there's any cure for it. We know that, but we can do things to minimize our risk. We have better mood and well-being. A lot of the research that I do is about the emotional aspect of brain health, and in particular, how we can lower our risk for depression, anxiety, and other disorders when our brain is healthier. And better physical performance makes sense, of course, because we need our brain to be communicating with our muscles and other body parts. And then greater functional independence in later life. This is a big one because as a clinical neuropsychologist, the clinical side of what I do, I see a lot of people who, as they are getting older, are becoming more dependent on other people for their daily living tasks. And the idea of being able to maintain their independence longer, being able to drive longer, that's a big one for people, being able to manage their finances, medication, what have you, that's a really big deal for people. So if we can think earlier in life about what we can do to help people hold on to that independence longer, we really can improve quality of life for people in a really powerful way. So now that you know what brain health is, how do we get that healthy brain that I'm talking about? Well, there are a few key lifestyle behaviors that research has shown over and over again give us the best chance at having a healthy brain, and they're summarized here. We're gonna go into each of these behaviors, again, briefly, even though it's gonna hurt me, I'm gonna wanna go into more detail. If I start rambling, just stop me, especially about exercise, because it's my favorite. But I do wanna give you the overview so that you can know what's your kind of roadmap to a healthier brain. So, the first one is exercise. So earlier, Dr. Mingo asked me during the Facebook Live, if there's one thing you could do for your brain, what would you do? And I said exercise. That is always my answer. I've been asked that question many times before. If you had one thing you could choose and only one thing, this is the thing that has the most research support and that I personally found to be the most fascinating because I spent all of graduate school, postdoc, and a few years of being faculty before I learned this literature. And once I did, I was hooked, and I've started incorporating exercise into my own research. So why am I so excited about exercise for brain health? Well, exercise has so many impacts on the brain. When it comes to brain structure, exercise can lead to the growth of new neurons, which then leads to an increase in brain volumes. And also it can decrease the pathology that causes Alzheimer's disease. So these are huge changes. I'll give a quick story. I knew I was gonna go off script, but I'm gonna do it, about how I got into this area of research. I actually was teaching a cognitive neuroscience of aging course at University of Florida, where I started my career. And one of my students gave a presentation about some research that he was helping with as a research volunteer, or a research assistant volunteer in a lab. And so as he's presenting his slides, and I'm supposed to be grading him because that's my job as the professor, I instead found myself writing down all these notes about ideas for research because he was showing me these impressive slides about how the areas of the brain that are affected the most by aging in terms of volume decline are overlapping tremendously with the areas of the brain that actually increase in volume the more fit you are. And this is something that I, again, throughout my training had never heard before. And it was one of those jaw drop moments where I was like, how is this possible? I had no idea. And this is fascinating and I need to learn more. And so I, from that day on, started reading about exercise, wrote a grant to get pilot data probably 2 months later, and the rest is history. So that's my little anecdote about how I found this out and just thought it was the most fascinating thing. Part of the reason why that fascination is there is because for many years people thought that as you get older that your ability to, for neurogenesis, to create new neurons was either gone down or completely gone. And to realize that no, that's not true, and exercise is one of those huge ways of boosting neurogenesis is absolutely fascinating as someone interested in aging. Okay, so I'll go through the other ones a little more quickly. The brain functions better during different tasks, mental tasks and physical tasks, when you are more physically fit or when you exercise. The communication between neurons is improved. The vasculature is improved. This is a big part of my research interest right now, trying to understand how we can improve vascular brain health, which then can lead to improved cognitive functioning as well as a decrease in depression and other disorders as we age. And then in terms of neurochemistry, there's a huge impact of exercise on chemicals that are really important for mood, for cognitive functioning. So for example, BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's an important protein that we need for the health and survival of neurons. Exercise can increase levels of BDNF in the body. And that's really important for my interest in depression as well, because BDNF tends to be lower in people who are depressed. Also tends to go down with aging. So if you can increase that with exercise, it can help to counter some of those negative sort of underlying mechanisms that can lead to age-related cognitive decline, as well as to depression. Another important one is inflammation. So chronic inflammation, which can lead to a cascade of physical and mental health problems, can be reduced by exercise as well. So lots of chemical benefits for the immune response, overall lots of positive things. I'll mention that these relationships have been shown not just in observational studies, but in intervention studies, when people have randomized clinical trials and will assign people to, for example, an aerobic exercise condition versus a stretching condition 3 times a week for 6 months. And so you see the actual changes that are greater in the aerobic group compared to the control group. So I think that's important to say, because in terms of the strength of the evidence, for exercise, it's really a lot stronger than some of the other areas, and I want to be honest about that. There's good evidence for all of it, but exercise has a long history of this evidence. So one thing that's great is that there are both immediate and long-term benefits of exercise. So when it comes to memory and cognitive functioning, for up to 2 hours after a bout of exercise, so you have your workout in the morning, you can have for up to 2 hours, according to research studies, benefits for executive functioning. So these complex skills higher order skills that we use to drive our goal-directed behavior. We have improvements in attention and in memory. So I always say that like working out first thing in the morning or lunchtime is great because it helps. For me, a lunchtime workout is great because in the afternoon I need coffee normally, and exercise can help me not need that as much. And instead I get that kind of attention boost from my midday workout, but also first thing in the morning can help get your day going because you have that extra focus. There's also, in terms of immediate benefits for mood, that people, when you look at right before and right after an exercise bout, that you have increases in positive emotions and decreases in negative emotions. On the long term, we have, on the memory and cognitive functioning side, not only better cognitive functioning, but a reduced risk for different types of dementia. And then for mood and well-being, exercise is really great for both treating and preventing depression and other mood disorders. Again, this is really important because studies show that the benefits of exercise or the efficacy on depression can be as great as the efficacy of medication and other treatments that we normally give for depression. A lot of studies now are looking at combining the two because for a lot of people, of course, I'm a psychologist, I'm always going to encourage therapy, but therapy plus exercise, or when needed, medication plus exercise is a great synergistic way of being able to improve mood and reduce future relapses of depression. So lots of cognitive and mood benefits. Okay, so different types of exercise can have different types of effects. And so in general, any movement is good. I don't have a slide about it, but it's important to note that it doesn't just require formal exercise to get benefits. Everyday physical activity, doing housework, doing yard work, just anything that's requiring movement has been shown to be beneficial. But it makes sense that more exertion is going to be better in terms of some of those biological effects. So when it comes to aerobic exercise, that's studied the most often because it is that more intense, moderate to vigorous activity. But there are also benefits of resistance training and mind-body exercise. Mind-body exercise is particularly great for depression and anxiety, stress levels, which makes sense. Anyone who's done yoga or Pilates, which is like my favorite, you know how wonderful it feels even while you're doing it, which many of us might enjoy more than in the moment running. In the moment yoga feels better. But they're all great, and you can all get a benefit, all can lead to benefits in various ways. So if you have multimodal training, meaning that you're doing more than one type of exercise, then you really kind of mix and match and get some of those benefits in a way that's better. And so I tend to recommend for people the recommendations that are given by the World Health Organization and the American College of Sports Medicine, which is this combination of aerobic training and strength training every week. The amount is dependent on age, but then for older adults, there's also a suggestion to include flexibility and balance training to help with reducing fall risk, which is really important as we age. And then the latest guidelines that just came out about a year ago, maybe 2 years, I lose time with COVID, also specifically recommend limiting sedentary activity. Now, it's kind of funny to get that recommendation in the middle of COVID because it literally came out during the pandemic when all of us were more sedentary, but it was a reminder that even when you're having back-to-back Zoom meetings to turn off your camera and stand up and walk around and move a little bit and not sit the whole time. So those are usually what you want to think about when it comes to exercise. Okay, so I spent the most time on that because it's my favorite and because it has the most benefit. Those two facts are related. So I'm going to go a little bit more quickly about the other lifestyle behaviors and then leave plenty of time for questions. So let's talk about the second lifestyle behavior, which is engaging your brain, having mental stimulation for a healthy brain. So when it comes to brain health, use it or lose it most definitely applies. That you want to keep your mind active and engaged throughout your life. And what's really fascinating is that the research shows that it really starts early. And I should mention this, for all the behaviors I'm going to say, we know that brain health is lifelong. And so you don't want to wait until you're 70 or 80 and say, ooh, let's think about my brain health. You want to start early. Early matters. And so in this case, we talk about education early on, that you can look at someone's, the quality of their education, not just the amount, but the quality of their education when they're young. And that tells you a lot about the what's likely to happen as they age in terms of their cognitive abilities, in terms of their brain health. So early life education. In sort of adulthood, we think about having a job that's cognitively demanding. So people who have jobs that require more problem solving and thinking outside of the box and just being engaged as opposed to more passive tend to age better in terms of their brain. And then as we get into later life, we want to think about things such as mentally engaging hobbies. So having things that you're doing for fun, leisure activities that require some degree of thinking, figuring things out, et cetera, has also been shown to be very beneficial. So all of this is related to this idea that we call cognitive reserve. So any of you who have studied neuropsychology or psychology or anything in that field might know about this. So cognitive reserve is this idea that we can basically build a buffer. Throughout our life, we can do things that give us a buffer against changes in the brain later on. So if you do start to develop Alzheimer's pathology, or you do start to experience age-related declines in the volumes or functioning of your brain, that you can actually not show as many signs of that because you have this buffer. That's the easiest way of thinking of it. And so the things that build cognitive reserve, a lot of them are what I've already been telling you. So it's things like exercises in there, but also we know there's going to be a biological part, right? There's going to be some innate influences, there's going to be genetic and prenatal influences, your IQ or overall intelligence, occupation, et cetera. So I'm not going to read those to you, but all of these things are considered to be proxies of cognitive reserve, meaning that in research studies we can use some combination of them to be able to kind of estimate how much reserve someone has. And we can show that over time, longitudinal studies show that people who have multiple of these types of buffers really do have less decline in the health of their brain as they get older. So a big part of that is really what you do to keep your brain active, keep your mind active throughout your life. Okay. So what's great, I mentioned there's this early influence that's really fascinating to me. But it's not too late to start. And I wanted to add this in particular because when I've given these kind of talks in the community, some people will say, okay, well, what am I supposed to do? Because I'm already, 60 years old and I didn't go to school for that long. My job was a more, physical job, not as much cognitively engaging. And I said, don't worry, you still can do something for yourself. You can start to take up new hobbies, new activities that keep your mind engaged, and the research shows that you get a boost from that. And so it's not too late, that wherever you are in your trajectory, in your lifespan, you can still get a benefit. Even to the point where people who already have dementia, if they do something that is mentally stimulating, they can basically buy some more time, have some more stability, not to mention that it can have a positive effect on their mood. So having, things like music is really a big sort of intervention used in dementia, and people in this room might know that even more than I do. So because I know there's a lot of great work being done having to do with people who have dementia, things, activity engagement, and how that can really benefit different aspects of functioning and reduce agitation, et cetera. So the point is that at any point that you are, you can get some benefit from just getting your mind going a little bit more. So this picture I took when I was in Greece because there's this cute older couple that gave me permission. I did ask them because I saw them looking out and pointing and looking out over the city. And they were just so sweet. So I took the picture first and then asked afterwards, can I use this? Because I feel like it's a great way of showing staying active throughout your life, because it was a tour that we were doing in Athens, and everywhere we went, they were there too. I'm like, this is amazing. I love it that they're just like, we're getting out there, we're doing things. And so I had to find a way to include this in my lecture because it was just a wonderful story and a wonderful trip. So yes, at any age, stay active. Travel is a great way of keeping your mind engaged. What you want to think about is how to keep your life full of different activities that are novel, challenging, that keep you engaged and that you find fun. You want to do less thinking about, expensive brain games. People are like, should I spend all my money on these subscriptions to these brain games? Probably not. I'm not saying they hurt, but you're going to get more benefit from just adding variety to what you do in your everyday life. So if it's something that's going to cost a lot of money, I say probably find something that's going to be free or cheaper. And also, you don't want to think about these quick fixes. It is one of my pet peeves when you see, 14 days to a better memory, and I'm just roll my eyes. As a neuropsychologist, it drives me crazy. There's not a quick fix. These are things that take, long-term commitments to having healthy behaviors, healthy habits that can cause a boost, and you cannot expect to have a quick fix. You also want to think about having variety and not just focusing on quantity. So people will say, well, I've been doing Sudoku puzzles. Should I keep doing more of those? And I'll say, Sudoku puzzles are great, but if you've been doing it for a while, what's next? Do something different. Now it's time to learn how to play a new instrument, or take an online class just for fun, or something else that's different, because you need to mix it up. And the research shows that at some point you kind of reach more of a plateau in terms of benefits, and so you want to make sure that you're doing things to keep it fresh. Okay, so number 3. Staying connected. So the things I'm going over with you today are all things from the book that I'll talk about at the end. And I wrote the chapter about the social activity during the pandemic, which again is always ironic because we all saw firsthand what it's like when you are forced to not have that connection with other people. We all saw how it affected our quality of life. It made our mood just overall not as positive. And the research shows that. The research shows that when you have social engagement, that you not only have better mood, but that your brain is also healthier. So the research, we talk about a distinction between sort of social engagement and social isolation and what they lead to. So social engagement being how much you're interacting with people, and that's going to be an objective sort of measure, is how much contact do you have with other people. That social engagement can lead to a sense of social connection. So you're feeling subjectively that you're close and connected to people. But notice that I said can. It's not necessarily the case, right? People can have interactions that are not positive, that are not helpful. So what's important is that you have positive social interactions that lead to a feeling of connection. So that's what you want to think about. The flip side is social isolation. Social isolation is an objective lack of social contact with others. And that can lead to a feeling of loneliness, but not necessarily. For some people, they're going to feel isolated and alone when they're not having contact. Other people are like, yeah, I'm good. I don't need more than this. They're more loners, if you will. So what's important, based on the research, is the disconnect between what you want and what you have when it comes to social connections. So it's not going to be the same for everybody, but are you satisfied with your social network? Are you satisfied with your amount of social engagement? That's what we want to think about. And so one of the few data slides I'll show you, there's a lot of research that shows that loneliness affects the brain. And again, a lot of people in this room are aware of this when it comes to older adults in particular, because we talk about a loneliness epidemic in general, but also particularly for older adults. And unfortunately, there are a number of negative effects of having this chronic loneliness. So in particular, when it comes to Alzheimer's disease, it's really just startling to see the strong link. So what this is showing you here, this figure on the left, is it's an imaging measure that allows you to look at basically tau pathology in the brain. Tau is one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. And then here you have scores on a loneliness scale. And so basically, the higher the loneliness scores, the higher the level of tau in the brain. You can see this relationship here. And so it's showing that people who were chronically lonely are having more buildup of tau in the brain. Similarly, for amyloid, which is the other hallmark of Alzheimer's disease, you have the same type of relationship where loneliness is here, amyloid burden is there, and you see this direct increase. And so I wanted to emphasize that because when we think about what we can do that doesn't have to cost money and that is accessible to anybody and to help to lower the risk for dementia, we can try to encourage social engagement, again, lifelong, and especially as people are getting older, particularly when people are retiring and having less opportunities built in to engage with people, getting people involved in volunteering and other things that will kind of keep them engaged to avoid that loneliness. It's something very attainable and tangible that we can do to help reduce the risk, and so that's why I wanted to show, again, one of the few data slides that I have in this talk. Okay. So I showed you some data about loneliness, so the flip side again being when you're socially engaged. People who are socially engaged, who have good quality social networks that they are happy with, have better cognitive functioning, they have less changes in their brain as they get older, And of course, we would expect this to benefit on mood as well, that people tend to have a greater sense of well-being, an increase in positive mood, and social engagement is one of the important things that we do for depression in terms of helping people to prevent as well as treat depression, getting that social engagement, which often is hard to do when someone who's feeling depressed and tends to withdraw. But if we can have that, behavioral activation, which often involves that social contact, it really can be powerful in depression. Okay, so moving on. Eating well. So people might get uncomfortable with this one because no one wants to think about their diet, right? So let's talk about what we know about nutrition and brain health. I will give the caveat here that nutrition research is really hard to do. We cannot have people for long periods of time restrict themselves to only eating and drinking what we tell them to do. And so the research that's done tends to be much more correlational, observational, that you're having people do food diaries, or maybe doing short-term studies, or maybe doing animal models. So I'm not saying that to knock the research, I'm saying it because I think it's important to know what the quality of the research is. So having said that, what we glean from different types of studies that try to find the best way of being able to understand how nutrition affects the brain is that the Mediterranean-style diet seems to have the most support for benefiting brain health. This makes me happy because my favorite kind of category of food is probably Mediterranean-style food, so yay, Mediterranean-style diet. What we know is that that type of diet tends to involve lots of produce, vegetables and fruits, whole grains, and lean meats, healthy fats. Olive oil is actually really good for you. Not only is it not bad, it's actually beneficial, that having more of it tends to be good because it does have healthy fats. This type of diet tends to limit red meat, although it's not forbidden, if you will, and refined grains and sweets, and then it includes moderate amounts of wine, which a lot of people are very happy to hear. So this is the general pattern for the Mediterranean-style diet. Again, I understand that's a broad category of countries and cuisines, but there's certain commonalities, and the research shows that people who have that type of diet tend to have healthier brains. And part of that's because what's good for the heart is what's good for the brain, and the Mediterranean-style diet is great for vascular health. I do want to emphasize that we're thinking about dietary patterns, and you're not trying to say that any food is the enemy. And that's actually another one of my pet peeves, is when people say, you can't have this food and you have to have all the blueberries and never have cheesecake. That's just not going to happen. I'm going to have a blueberry cheesecake. So I think it's good to think about patterns and what you want to minimize and maximize, as opposed to trying to avoid one or two particular things. So emphasize some of these components of the Mediterranean-style diet. Minimize some of the added sugar, saturated fat, as much as possible. And don't worry about the fad diets. There's a new diet coming out all the time. And some diets might be helpful for one aspect of health, but that doesn't mean they're helpful for brain health. And in general, it seems like the more that you just balance your diet, and again, have this pattern of overall emphasizing some of the healthier foods, that's where you have your best bet. Okay. I do want to mention brain health supplements, and I want to give the caveat that I am not talking about supplements for other aspects of health. When it comes to brain health, I think that is not your best bet for having a healthy brain. And I'm not just saying I think that, I'm basing this again on the research. And the research suggests that in general, these supplements really are not having any noticeable benefits to brain health. Oftentimes the companies will do their own in-house research and say, oh, we saw an improvement in memory. But when you look at the data, the improvements, if any, are in a subset of people, and it's very minimal and not one that would be expected to have an impact on your day-to-day life. So, and then when people try to replicate it, they can't. And so it's one of those things where it seems like that's not the best way to go if what you're thinking about is brain health. The other reason, well, two other reasons why I don't suggest them. Another one is that because supplements aren't FDA approved, they're not regulated, there was a disturbing study that actually did, I guess, a chemical analysis of, I don't remember how many, but at least dozens of different brain health supplements. And they found all of these unlisted ingredients, some of which were harmful, that were not listed on the bottle because they're not required to be. And so I'm not trying to say that all supplements are bad. I'm saying that it's just another reason to say, might be some better ways of actually being able to get the nutrients that I need. Our body my understanding is that we absorb the nutrients differently from food versus supplements anyway. So if you want to think about things like omega-3 that we do believe might have a positive benefit on brain health, eat some fish as opposed to taking the supplement might be your best bet. The other thing that as a clinician is why I tend to tell people I'm not so sure it's the best bet is that a lot of people that I've seen will want to take a pill because it seems like the easy way out. And they say, okay, if I have mild cognitive impairment, I want to get dementia. Can I take these pills and I'm going to be okay? And so, number one, it's complicated trying to prevent dementia once you have MCI, but we certainly know that the healthy lifestyle behaviors are more effective. And I don't want people to feel like, oh, I have this pill now, I'm good, I'm not going to worry about it. Having said that, I do have patients who will ask me, oh, I'm taking omega-3s or whatever else, is that okay? And I will say, the research doesn't really say it's that beneficial, but if you're taking, if you found a brand that you've been taking and it's safe, I don't think it's going to hurt anything, but you need to do more. So it's that balance of understanding that it's not your best bet. You want to watch out for companies that aren't as credible that are making the supplements to make sure you're not getting anything that's negative, and you want to make sure that you combine it with healthy behaviors and don't just rely on the supplements. Okay, so next behavior, sleeping well. So this is the behavior that I felt the most convicted when I wrote about it, because I thought, oh man, okay. So I work a lot, but also enjoy having my life and my husband and my friends, and that meant that my sleep was getting less and less. And then I realized I gotta do something about this. So I promise you I'm telling the truth when I say that after reading all the research that informed these slides and the chapter in the book, I couldn't ignore the fact that I needed to have more sleep. I felt really kind of scared about the lack of sleep I was getting. So why is that? Well, in general, we know that sleep supports all of our major body systems, and that's going to include the brain, of course. It's really important for our immune system. It's important for our different cognitive processes. We all know this. Even after like one day of not having sleep, we know we feel off. But long term, there can be problems as well. And then from an emotional standpoint, our emotion regulation and motivation can be impacted by chronically having restricted sleep. So what I want to sort of emphasize is that we're talking about long term. So everyone's gonna have periods of time where they're not sleeping as well. And there's no reason to get overly alarmed other than that short-term negative effect it's having. Don't worry that means that your brain health is just gone because you've had, a couple of weeks of not sleeping well because you have a grant due or whatever. The issue is that you can tell I'm in academia, right? Because that's what I think of. So what you want to think about is kind of long-term patterns that you want to have sufficient good quality sleep. Good quality is an important point because you can sleep and not have good sleep if you're waking up a lot, so it's interrupted or fragmented sleep. A lot of times sleep that's been impacted by different medications or other chemicals, well, you won't get into those stages of deep sleep. So you want to have that sort of, if possible, more uninterrupted sleep. Ideally, 7 to 8 hours seems to be the sweet spot according to the research for most people. I do want to acknowledge that there can be some variation across people, but from my understanding, we don't know how to determine who needs that amount needs less sleep. And so if you can shoot for 7 or 8, it's probably a good idea. When you don't get enough good quality sleep, you can have lots of changes that happen in your brain, including a reduction in the size of the hippocampus, which we know is really important for memory. You can have a thinning of the cerebral cortex. You can have an increase in the ventricles. So the ventricles are the natural spaces in the brain where you have cerebrospinal fluid. That's natural. But if they expand, if they're bigger, it's a sign that the brain is getting smaller. And that tends to happen when you have chronically poor sleep. You can have reduced neurogenesis. So I mentioned how exercise is one way of increasing neurogenesis and being able to have that ability to grow new neurons. But you have a reduction in that ability with chronically poor sleep. And then the communication between parts of the brain can be affected as well. So again, this is all very sobering for a lot of us who don't get good sleep. And so I would say take it as a motivation to go to bed an hour earlier if you can, or set the alarm an hour later and just work later if you have to, whatever it might be. It's not helpful to freak out if you haven't been doing this, but you can try to do things in the future to improve your sleep. one thing, so I had to show this figure because I just think it's so fascinating. I love brain pictures. And I'll tell you what this is about. So sleep is associated with Alzheimer's disease. So people who have fragmented sleep do have a higher risk for Alzheimer's disease. People who have Alzheimer's disease tend to have sleep problems as well. So there's this sort of bidirectional relationship. What this is showing you here is that there's a study that was done a couple years ago that I found really fascinating, that this is showing you, they basically use color to label the cerebrospinal fluid. So that's that fluid that cushions the brain, that's inside the, like I said, the holes in the brain, the ventricles, and cushions around the brain as well. And so during sleep, basically the cerebrospinal fluid is like, they called it like a rinse cycle, that when people got into certain stages of sleep, you would have these rhythmic flow of cerebrospinal fluid that kind of washed over the brain. And as that happened, different toxins were basically being carried with it. And so what the authors concluded is that basically during sleep that you're having this waste removal that's happening. And one reason why you can have problems with brain health when you don't have sufficient sleep is that you're not having that time to remove those toxins because it's not happening during the day. And one of the toxins that gets removed is amyloid, which is what we know is one of the hallmarks that we have for Alzheimer's disease. So I just thought, again, I saw this and I was like, okay, I gotta sleep, because it's a really important thing to think about in terms of some of the possible long-term effects. Okay, so let's move on and get ready to wrap up soon. So a more kind of broad category of behaviors is to take care of our physical and mental health. And one of the things I emphasize when I talk about this topic is that what's good for the heart, again, is good for the brain. So heart health equals brain health. When we think about, if we had sort of one class of medical conditions that we could say, if we can control these, then brain health will be better, it's gonna be vascular diseases. So vascular diseases, whether it be, or vascular risk factors. So risk factors for vascular disease, such as high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, et cetera, as well as the actual outright vascular diseases, such as having a heart attack or coronary artery disease. All of these things can affect the health of your brain. And so we know that anytime you affect the blood flow to the heart, which is going to be a cardiovascular disease, or to the brain, which is going to be a cerebrovascular disease, that you can then affect the brain. This is particularly true of white matter, which are those bundles of fibers that connect parts of the brain together. And what I find really interesting, and again, part of the research that we're doing in my lab is looking at how that type of disruption in the brain to the white matter can lead to depression in older adults that looks different than other types of depression, and it's harder to treat. And even when people go through traditional treatments, they don't have that improvement in vascular brain health, and the outcomes tend to be a lot worse off. There's a health disparity there because we know that vascular diseases are more common in Black older adults. And so this type of depression that's harder to treat has this very vulnerable group that I can talk about in a different talk, really is not represented in the research. And so part of what my lab is doing is trying to fill that gap in literature to understand what we can do to improve vascular brain health in older adults in general, but particularly in the vulnerable groups who have that health disparity that affects the rates of it. So I'm going to stop there. This is one of those slides where I could go off for a long time because this is one of my big areas of interest. So just know that vascular diseases impact the brain and that the vascular risk factors can as well, as I already mentioned. A really important point is that middle age is actually the most important time for this. And this is something that I also, probably until maybe 3 or 4 years ago, wasn't quite aware of this body of literature. But studies that look longitudinally as well as cross-sectionally at different age groups. If you look at a person's, for example, blood pressure control, when they're in their 40s and 50s, or you look at the blood pressure control when they're in their 70s or 80s, the 40s and 50s blood pressure is going to be more predictive of their brain health measured in various ways. Risk for dementia, rates of cognitive decline, et cetera. The middle age heart health brain is more predictive of late life brain health. So what you do early matters. So again, it doesn't mean that your blood pressure and body weight and things like that don't matter when you're older. They do. It's just saying that there's a stronger relationship between midlife risk factors and later brain health and when it comes to the vascular risk factors. So that's a really good, I think, motivation for people to, again, start early and not wait until you're like, well, okay, now it's time to be responsible and think about my brain. No, think about it now, whatever age you are. I always say if you're 15, now's the time to think about it. If you're 95, now's the time to think about it. Like, it's never too late, it's never too early. You want to be thinking about it. So there's this interrelationship. So I have these 3 circles, but I want to make the comment that these are all intertwined in a way that I think we shouldn't necessarily separate. So physical health, brain health, and mental health are kind of all the same thing, right? Because the brain is part of the body and mental health is intrinsically connected to your body. But for the purposes of kind of making a few points, I want to have this slide that shows that they're all interconnected. That aside from the fact that we know that heart disease and other conditions can affect brain health, which I just mentioned, we know that when it comes to mental health, there's this connection between the brain and mental health. Again, a lot of the research that I do in my lab is looking at the brain basis of depression, but other conditions as well, that if you have disruption to the brain in certain areas, you're more likely to develop certain disorders. But also, when you have certain conditions, that can contribute to further decline. So there's a bidirectional relationship that's been shown by longitudinal studies when it comes to the brain and mental health. And then we also know there's a bidirectional relationship between physical health and mental health. So brain health, physical health, mental health, they're all connected. And so if you can basically intervene at any point of that, then you can help the rest of it, is the point. That since they are so overlapping, that anything, if you can disrupt that basically cycle, if you think of it that way, that you can improve multiple things. And so the healthy behaviors that we've been talking about that are good for a healthy brain also promote physical and mental health. And that's what I love about these behaviors, is that this is like the key to like I don't want to say happiest, that's way too Pollyanna, but it gives you the best chance of, at least from a brain and mental health standpoint, of having the best outcomes. If you do these behaviors, you're affecting all 3 parts of that figure that I just showed you. So multi-purpose activities, basically. So that, again, was the quick-ish overview of the different behaviors. And being realistic, these are hard things to do. I can tell you all this, I can talk about the research, and you're not gonna say, all right, well, starting tomorrow, it's all changed. I'm gonna make all this, all these dramatic changes in my life. We know that's not gonna happen because that's not how human behavior works. So I try to encourage people to think about setting realistic goals that are very specific, very small. If you haven't been moving, then try 2 days a week going for a walk for 10 or 15 minutes after dinner. That's it. Start there. That's your goal. Don't say you're gonna get a new gym membership and you're gonna go 5 days a week. Don't go buy a bunch of new equipment. Just start walking. Walk your dog or go for a walk on your own or with a friend or a family member. Something small as an example of what you can do. And it's easier if you choose 1, maybe 2 of the healthy behaviors to tackle, and then you add on more, because again, it's overwhelming and demoralizing when you just try to do all of it. You have this whole map of your life that you're gonna change, and then it's overwhelming and you stop. So realistic, specific small goals are helpful. Planning ahead in terms of thinking about how to fit things into your day. So I like to schedule out time in my calendar. This is when I'm working out, it's in my calendar. So unless there's something I don't know, there's some meetings that you have to try to be flexible, then fine, but then I'm gonna move that time. I'm not gonna say I'm not working out, I'm saying, well, for the purpose of the whole group that's trying to schedule, I'll allow this time, but then I'm moving that to a different time point. So it's in my calendar. So planning ahead, anticipating barriers, we're gonna always have them. It's impossible to anticipate all of them, but if you try ahead of time to do that, that makes you more likely to succeed. Trying to make it fun. So some of these things are not gonna feel fun, right? But you can make it more fun if you don't wanna work out. I know I keep talking about exercise, but it's my favorite. Plan it with a friend, make it a social thing. I got into fitness personally, aside from professionally, because a friend took me to a Zumba class. I was like, this is so much fun. I don't feel like I'm working out, this is great. I love dancing, let's do this. So I started exercising initially because I didn't feel like I was exercising. So if you can find a way that's a sport that you like, or just doing something social with friends, again, go for a walk. It's spring now. We're getting into warmer weather. So just doing that kind of thing can make it more fun. And then if you can combine brain healthy behavior. So for example, one thing that I've recommended for some of the families that I see is, as a family, try a new brain healthy recipe. So here's some ideas, learn how to make it together. So then you're having this healthier food you're doing, but you're having that family time, getting that social engagement, because you're learning something new, maybe a new technique, you're getting the mental stimulation. So there you go, one activity, you've done 3 things. So if you can combine those behaviors, it's actually really, really wonderful. So again, that doesn't mean it's simple. I'm not saying this is all that you need. I'm saying there's a few tips to help you get started or to maintain a healthy, a brain healthy lifestyle. So I will end with reiterating what I said before, which is that brain health is a lifelong process. So wherever you are in your life, whatever your health status is, start now. It doesn't matter what you've done before because you can't change that. Right now, you can make some decisions, some choices to start living in a way that gives you the best chances of having a healthy brain. There's no magic here. I'm not saying that this is like the formula and you're guaranteed to live to 110 without getting dementia. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that you can have the best chance of living life to the fullest, of being able to be functionally independent longer, being able to have your mood better. Like who doesn't want that? So these are the ways that you can, based on science, that you are able to have the best chances of that full and good life. So I will stop there. I appreciate your attention. I will mention really briefly that I have the picture here of the book, that there's also some postcards out there about that hot off the presses about 2 weeks ago came out that goes into a lot more detail about what I just said. So each of the behaviors I mentioned is a chapter in that book. And the book does go into more detail about the science. There's lists of resources and references. And so I should just be kind of cruel and say if you want the reference list, buy the book. But I will still send you the reference list if you want something, if you would like to after this is done. So my contact information is there. You can scan the QR code to get some links to order the book. And I will open things up to questions. And again, thank you for your time.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So at this time, we would like to open it up to questions from person attendees as well as our virtual attendees. As Dr. Morgan mentioned in the introduction, for our virtual attendees, questions to gerontology. That's gerontology at edu. Have someone fielding those questions, and then we can ask Dr. Dotson. And we have microphones on each end. Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought there was a virtual question coming up. And since I'm closer, I might as well step up and be the first.
Go for it.
All right. Hello, I'm an exercise science major here at Georgia State University. So I'm geeked already. I really appreciate, it was a beautiful presentation overall. But I wanted to ask specifically about the modes of different exercises that the elderly participate in. I wanted to ask, even though aerobic is the most studied overall, I wanted to ask whether, based on your research and conversations with your colleagues, whether resistance training can actually be more beneficial over time if combined with the aerobic. My rationale for this question is that we know through weight training, it can prevent a concept known as sarcopenia, which is the loss of muscle mass due to age. It happens to everybody. But I'm wondering, based on the research you've read, how much of that sarcopenia, how much of that loss in muscle mass can be reduced over time as compared with just aerobic training or flexibility training?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. Thank you for that. And it's great to have someone from exercise science here. I collaborate with Becky Ellis in your department, who's just wonderful. So thanks for being here. So absolutely, resistance training is great for sarcopenia. It is great for, so again, we're thinking about different outcomes. So meaning, are we talking about changes to the brain or changes to other aspects of physical or mental health? And so in this case, resistance training, number one, is very great for sarcopenia. There's actually a great company in town called Vivo that does exercise resistance training classes for older adults to help to prevent sarcopenia. There's also a really great longitudinal study called the LIFE study that's led by Marco Pahor at University of Florida that's also using a walking intervention as well as some resistance training to help try try to prevent sarcopenia. So when it comes to anything related to muscles or physical functioning, resistance training is going to be better. But what's interesting, a study just came out maybe a week ago that was showing how when it comes to BDNF, which is the protein that's important for the health of neurons, so for brain health, is increased more by resistance training than by aerobics. And so that's an example of how one particular aspect of brain health might be benefited more by resistance training, but then other aspects maybe not as much, which is why I suggest multimodal training so that you're getting all those different benefits. Yeah, thanks.
And I have a few questions here from our virtual attendees. First one is there any evidence that dementia is effective in some way, such as dealing with?
That's an interesting question. So I'm going to say overall no. I mean, I understand where they're coming from, which is thinking that if a person has memory difficulties, then it's going to be harder to remember trauma. And so in that regard, I can see how it could be positive. But when you weigh the losses versus the benefits of not having that memory, I don't think anyone would call that protective, so to speak. It just might be one kind of silver lining in a situation that is overall marked by decline. So.
Another one here says, as a GSU 62 student in the gerontology master's program,
Yes.
I'm interested in your exercise interventions to brain function. You stated that exercise is important in enhancing cognitive functioning. Are there target outcomes that can be measured as you work and adjust?
So I'm not sure if they're asking about like on an individual level, because as scientists, we have target outcomes like that tests that measure executive functioning or attention or processing speed. I think when it comes to an individual person, you want to think about what matters to you. So, are you having an easier time focusing at work? Are you finding yourself having less memory slips? Those sorts of outcomes might matter more for an individual, which is going to be related to the different tests that we might give as researchers, but it's a little bit of a different question unless you want to do your own research study on yourself, in which case I'm happy to suggest some tests that you can give yourself. I'm just kidding, I actually don't recommend self-testing for cognitive functioning.
One says that they would like to hear your thoughts about creative engagement activities such as visual art.
All of that is wonderful for the brain. So it's wonderful for the brain, it's wonderful for mood. There's a lot of really interesting studies that show that people who get involved in, they'll do, sort of group dance classes, or they'll do art are huge. Again, music's really huge. How much that benefits cognitive functioning, and that you can also measure benefits directly in the brain. Something sort of related to that, but I wanted to find a way to slip it in because I love this program. There's something called Experience Corps. That's a program that I think is headed at Duke, but it's in multiple cities, including in Baltimore, where they actually match older adults with children in schools who are having difficulty learning to read. And so the older adults tutor them, but also do other activities with them that can include some of the creative things. And the results that they've shown are tremendous. I mean, they follow people longitudinally, they measured them before they started and then afterwards, and seeing the benefits to their brain, to their mood, it's fantastic. So the more you can be active doing different things, the better.
My name is Damon. I just wanted to ask a question. What are your ideas and thoughts on fasting and when it regards to brain health?
That's a really good question. And so I didn't include that in the slides, and it's something that I will admit that I know a little bit about, but not a ton. I know that intermittent fasting on the long term is beneficial for a number of outcomes and seems to be sort of protective as one ages. So that's particularly true for a lot of physical health measures. My understanding that it does also seem to have some benefits from a brain health standpoint. It's an area of research that's a little bit newer than some of the other behaviors, but it is something that seems to have some promise. Short term, it can be sometimes cause some problems. Long term, it can be positive, but I definitely recommend for people to, particularly as you're getting older, check with your doctor about how to do it, because one thing that's not clear is like there's different schedules, for example, for doing it, how many hours you're eating versus not, and when we just make it up on our own, we don't really know what that's gonna do. Yeah.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great question.
I'll ask a question. So, you mentioned how in exercising, your brain, for lack of better words, lights up, which is why you recommend it for morning or early afternoon. But what about for night? People that exercise at night, does your brain light up in the same way that then interferes with your sleep and works against your brain health?
Yeah, that's a really good question too. So it depends on the type of exercise. So having really vigorous exercise late at night is not recommended in terms of sleep because the research does show that it can interfere with sleep. But having more light activity, something like yoga, is wonderful at night. And some people find that benefit because it helps to relax them. I didn't get into it in the slides, but there's a lot about kind of what you do leading up to bed that can make a big difference in how you sleep. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer, we know that, right? But the research shows that as well. So more low intensity, just taking a walk or yoga can be helpful. You don't want to go, run 5 miles and then go to sleep an hour later because there's a good chance. You might feel physically exhausted, but that's different than your body being able to slow down to sleep well.
So,
Hi.
I'm a graduate student of gerontology here at Georgia State. My question is related to the effects of meditation on brain health. What are your thoughts on that?
It's wonderful. So I didn't get into a lot on the slide talking about mind-body exercises. One of the reasons why things like yoga and Tai Chi seem to be so helpful because it involves similar sort of concepts and sometimes directly the same thing as meditation. Meditation is fantastic for brain health. It's fantastic for, of course, mental health. So I highly, highly recommend that as part of, it really is helpful for multiple things. It's helpful. Number one, it does help promote sleep. So one thing in the book that I talk about is that if you incorporating meditation as part of your evening activities that can help to bring your body down, it's helpful in that short term. But then long term, people who regularly practice meditation and other aspects of mindfulness tend to have better outcomes when it comes to brain health, when it comes to managing stress, regulating emotions. It really is a fantastic thing to do.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm going to have to add that to my slides next time I do something like this because it actually really is one of those big things that is worth noting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi there. This is so interesting, and I'm going to get your book, and I'm sure everybody in here is. I was wondering if you've looked at the research on people who are religious or the role of spirituality with brain health?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. This is another area that I know a little bit, but not a lot, so I want to give the caveat. But there definitely seems to be some benefit for religion in terms of protecting against, again, both sort of brain changes as well as mental health as people age. And it varies because, of course, there's a lot of variability in religion and how much people adhere to it. But people who report having a strong sense of faith and who are more adherent to different aspects of their religion tend to report better mood, and there are some studies that show some protective factors when it comes to the aging process, when it comes to the brain aging process, I should say. So there seems to be some benefit, but again, the caveat being that it's not my area of expertise.
And I know it overlaps with a lot too.
It does.
I mean, think about the social connectivity part, that's going to be, in there. And then, if you're highly religious, you're probably not having beer and pizza every night, so there's overlap. But, I have read that.
I was going to say, oh no, I know some people.
Even beyond that there is a relationship between religiosity and brain health.
Yeah.
And I think of the nun study.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's still going on, but
it's still going on. So the nun studies, this huge longitudinal study has been, I think it's at Rush. I think it's one of the Rush University studies, but it's been going on, I might have the university wrong, but it's been going on for years, and they've been studying this group of nuns.
Minnesota or something?
Yeah, and so it really shows a lot of positive, a different trajectory of aging in that group. But the problem is that you know, it's a very restricted environment. There's so many uncontrolled things, so I'm not trying to knock it. It's actually really fascinating, some of their findings, but it's hard to know how much that generalizes to religion in general.
Right.
So yeah, but you really hit on an important point about the social aspect. And again, in my clinical work, I make a big point for people who do report being part of a church community or a religious community to encourage that as a way of getting that social connection. And so if they're having more isolation, taking advantage, if that's something they have found positive before, it's easy over time to start withdrawing and then kind of almost forgetting that that was something that was beneficial and protective.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I'll try to encourage that re-engagement with the religious community if they found that to be helpful for them.
Early on, yeah. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Any other questions? Virtual attendings, gerontology@gsu.edu.
Evening, Dr. Dotson. Amazing presentation. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I have a question. I have become increasingly interested in neurodivergence. And so when I think about having to self-manage and, because that's really, this is great information, but then we, like you said, we have to do it and we have to do it bit by bit and you have to be motivated. And so, and I also think about an incoming generation where the neurodivergence is, it'll be generations who have these diagnoses, right? Like right now you don't see as much because that wasn't labeled as much for older adults, but now we're going to see children who have ADHD and other neurodivergence. So I'm just curious about, is there any emerging literature about maybe where that comes into this discussion about brain health and self-management and health promotion, and if so, kind of what are your thoughts about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's definitely literature suggesting that, you know, many of the behaviors that, well, really in general, the behaviors that we've gone over today are beneficial in people who are neurodivergent. And so there's studies that are looking specifically at different groups. But obviously that can come with challenges to implementing them. And that really goes across the board, right? You can have someone who has challenges implementing it because of the community where they live in. That's a huge part that, again, I wish I had more time to talk about because practically, I know that impacts people's ability to be able to do this. So whether it be having neurodivergence or other kind of things that limit the ability to do it, I think what I haven't seen in literature is kind of how to address those barriers and challenges to help people live this type of life. And again, it's something that I acknowledge is difficult, that saying here's this formula to make life better, but actually doing it is not a simple thing. I actually try to spend a lot of time with the patients that I see in my feedback sessions. You know, a lot of neuropsychologists either don't give a feedback session, they just write a report and send it off, or they make it really quick. I want to sit and talk about, okay, I'm saying these things that you should do. What might get in the way? I don't say, do you think something's going to get in the way? I say, what's going to get in the way? Because something will. Let's talk about obstacles in advance. Let's start brainstorming how to get around them. And then we're gonna check in a few weeks and see how's it going and what new things came up, because it's difficult. And so I think that applies to lots of different groups. And so I think to your question, as far as I know, there's less literature talking about how to get around that possible barrier, but it really is true. It can be true for lots of reasons because life happens. Life happens for those of us who don't have these special circumstances, and especially for people who have other things medically or otherwise that get in the way. Yeah, you're welcome. And it's very funny hearing you call me Dr. Dotson, Siobhan, so.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Kemp presenting Dr. Dotson.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Gerontology Institute, faculty, staff, students, and friends, we just want to say thank you so much for being our 2022 Payne Lecturer.
Thank you.
Just a little something.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. It was very kind. Thank you. Okay. I guess that wraps things up. Well, thank you for everyone who attended virtually as well as in person. It's been a pleasure. And do feel free to follow up. My contact information has been up there for a while, so hopefully you got it. I'm happy to answer questions and send you articles or anything else that I can do. Thank you.